Arizona Territory, 1876. A land where opportunity and danger rode the same dusty trails across the unforgiving desert, where a person's fate could turn as quickly as a summer storm over the Sonoran plains. For the Mitchell family, the promise of a new beginning had drawn them from their crowded tenement in Philadelphia to the vast, open spaces of the Southwest, where land was plentiful for those willing to work it. 14-year-old Emily Mitchell had spent nearly 7 weeks traveling by train and wagon, watching the landscape transform from lush eastern woodlands to rolling prairies, and finally to the stark beauty of the Arizona desert. Their small caravan, just 3 families bound by shared dreams and stubborn determination, had claimed adjacent parcels near Silver Creek, 20 miles from the nearest settlement of Willow Springs. No one could have foreseen the violence that would shatter their fragile new world, leaving nothing but ash and silence where hope had once taken root. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had begun like any other since the Mitchells had established their homestead. Emily rose before dawn to help her mother prepare breakfast while her father and older brother Thomas tended to the livestock. Her younger sisters, twins Sarah and Rebecca, slept peacefully in the small bedroom they shared in the modest cabin her father had built with his own hands. As the first rays of sunlight spilled across the horizon, painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson, Emily stepped outside to gather eggs from the henhouse. The air was cool, a temporary reprieve from the heat that would build as the day progressed. In the distance, she could see the faint outline of the Dragoon Mountains, their jagged peaks reaching toward an impossibly blue sky. "Should be a good day for working on the irrigation ditch," her father announced as Emily returned with her basket of eggs. Samuel Mitchell was a practical man, a carpenter by trade, who had reimagined himself as a farmer when economic hardship had struck Philadelphia. His calloused hands and sun-weathered face told the story of months of back-breaking labor, yet there was a contentment in his eyes that had been absent in the city. "Do you think we'll have enough water for the corn?" Emily asked, setting the basket on the rough-hewn table her father had crafted during their first week on the homestead. "The spring hasn't failed us yet," her father replied. "And your brother's idea about diverting part of the creek should give us plenty come harvest time." 20-year-old Thomas entered, carrying a pail of fresh milk. "Mason says there's talk of the railroad pushing through before winter," he reported, referring to their nearest neighbor. "Says it'll bring more settlers, maybe even a proper town closer than Willow Springs." "More settlers means a proper school," Emily's mother Hannah noted, as she stirred cornmeal mush over the cookstove. Her gaze drifted to the twins, now awake, and helping to set the table. "The girls need more education than what I can provide with just our family Bible and that old arithmetic primer. The domestic scene, so ordinary, so filled with the small hopes and plans that defined frontier life, would be the last peaceful moment Emily would know for many months. The first gunshot came just as they were finishing breakfast. It cracked through the morning air like thunder, followed immediately by shouts and the sound of galloping horses. Samuel Mitchell was on his feet instantly, reaching for the rifle he kept mounted over the door. "Thomas, get the shotgun. Hannah, take the girls to the root cellar." "What about Emily?" her mother asked, already gathering the frightened twins. "I'll help Pa," Emily said firmly. Despite her age, she was a capable shot, having learned to hunt small game during their journey west. Her father hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Get my pistol from the bedroom, and stay low." Through the cabin's small window, Emily could see riders approaching the Mason homestead, the nearest to theirs. At least 8 men, their faces obscured by bandanas, firing indiscriminately as they circled the cabin. A woman's scream cut through the air, abruptly silenced by another gunshot. "Dear God," her father muttered, "those are the Blackwell gang. They've been raiding isolated homesteads all through the territory. The Blackwell gang was infamous throughout Arizona. Ruthless outlaws who preyed on remote settlements, stealing valuables and livestock before burning everything to the ground. The territorial authorities had posted rewards for their capture, but the vast, sparsely populated landscape provided endless places to hide. "Pa, they're coming this way," Thomas warned, his young face pale but determined as he positioned himself at another window. "Emily, change of plans. Get to the root cellar with your mother and sisters. If anything happens to us—" Samuel Mitchell's voice caught, then steadied. "There's a map in my lockbox showing the way to Willow Springs. Take the small wagon if you can. Go on foot if you must." Before Emily could protest, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder as several riders broke away from the Mason place and headed toward their cabin. "Go now!" her father ordered, and this time Emily obeyed, racing to the trap door that led to the cool darkness below their kitchen floor. The root cellar was little more than a hole dug into the hard desert soil, reinforced with timber and lined with stone shelves that held preserved foods and water jugs. Emily found her mother huddled with the twins in the farthest corner, a lantern casting long shadows across their frightened faces. "Is Pa coming?" 9-year-old Sarah whispered. "He and Thomas are protecting the house," Emily answered, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We need to stay quiet now." Above them, the first shots were exchanged. Her father's measured rifle fire and Thomas's shotgun blasts answered by a barrage from the attackers. The sound of breaking glass and splintering wood told Emily the cabin was taking heavy damage. Then came a sound that froze her blood. Her father's voice, raised in pain, followed by Thomas shouting his name. More gunfire, heavier now, and the unmistakable thud of bodies falling. Hannah Mitchell stifled a sob, pressing her face against Rebecca's hair. Emily found herself instinctively reaching for the pistol her father had instructed her to bring, checking that it was loaded as he had taught her. For what seemed like hours, but could only have been minutes, they listened to the sounds of destruction. Above, furniture being overturned, possessions being ransacked. Male voices called to each other, occasionally laughing. One voice, deeper than the others, and carrying an unmistakable authority, issued commands. "Take anything worth selling. Burn the rest." Emily's mother suddenly gripped her arm. "They'll find the cellar," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "You need to go now." "I won't leave you," Emily protested. Hannah Mitchell's face, illuminated by the dim lantern light, showed a mother's fierce determination. "There's a crawl space that leads out behind the smokehouse. Your father built it as an escape route. It's too small for me to navigate with the twins, but you can make it. Then the twins can go with me," Emily insisted. Her mother shook her head. "They're too young, too frightened. They'd never stay quiet enough." She pressed something cold and metallic into Emily's hand, her father's pocket watch. "Take this to remember us. Find help if you can. But if not, save yourself." Before Emily could argue further, footsteps directly overhead silenced them all. The trapdoor rattled as someone tried the handle. "There's something here," a gruff voice called out. Hannah pushed Emily toward a narrow opening partially concealed behind a stack of preserves. "Go. Now, remember what your father always told. You Mitchells don't surrender." With tears streaming down her face, Emily crawled into the narrow tunnel, her father's pistol and pocket watch clutched tightly in her hands. Behind her, she heard the trapdoor being forced open, her mother's defiant voice, then gasps of fear from her sisters. She forced herself to keep moving through the cramped passageway, even as shots rang out behind her. The sounds would haunt her dreams for years to come. The tunnel emerged, as her mother had said, behind the family's small smokehouse. Emily crouched there, paralyzed with horror as she watched flames begin to consume their cabin. Through the haze of smoke and tears, she could see the bandits leading away their horses and the 2 milk cows that had been her father's pride. Others loaded sacks of plunder onto their mounts. The man who seemed to be their leader stood apart, observing the destruction with cold detachment. Even with a bandana covering the lower half of his face, there was something distinctive about him, a streak of grey hair at his temple, visible beneath his hat, and an unusual silver belt buckle that caught the morning sun. Emily committed these details to memory, a silent vow taking shape within her. If she survived, she would see him answer for what he had done this day. As the raiders mounted up and prepared to depart, Emily realized she couldn't stay where she was. The fire would soon spread to the outbuildings, and the men might do a final sweep of the property. With nothing but her father's pistol, the pocket watch, and the clothes on her back, she slipped away toward the dense mesquite thickets that lined Silver Creek. The desert that had seemed so full of promise now stretched before her, vast and unforgiving. Willow Springs lay 20 miles to the east, a journey that would be challenging even under ideal circumstances. For a 14-year-old girl alone, without provisions or a horse, it would be a desperate race against thirst, exposure, and the possibility that the Blackwell gang might discover her escape as she followed the creek bed. Staying under cover of vegetation whenever possible, Emily Mitchell forced herself to focus on immediate survival rather than the overwhelming grief that threatened to consume her. Each step took her farther from everything she had known and loved toward an uncertain future that would demand more of her than she could possibly imagine. What she couldn't know, as she navigated that first terrible day of solitude, was that her path would soon cross with that of a man whose own life had been shaped by similar violence. An Apache scout named Daniel Nietzsche, whose tracking skills and personal vendetta against the Blackwell gang would transform her desperate flight into something far more complex, a journey toward both justice and an understanding of survival that transcended cultural boundaries. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first day of Emily's flight passed in a haze of shock and physical strain. She followed Silver Creek as it wound through the desert landscape, knowing water was her most precious resource. The Arizona summer showed no mercy. By midday, the temperature had climbed well above 100 degrees, the sun beating down with relentless intensity. Emily's city-bred body, though toughened by months of homestead work, struggled against the extreme conditions. Her fair skin burned despite the bonnet she wore, and her throat grew parched as she rationed the water she scooped into her cupped hands from the increasingly shallow creek. When dusk finally brought relief from the heat, Emily found shelter beneath an overhang of rock. She curled into herself, physically exhausted yet unable to close her eyes, without seeing the flames consuming her family's cabin, without hearing those final shots that had silenced her mother and sisters. Sleep came in brief, troubled fragments, interrupted by the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night. The howl of coyotes, the rustling of creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through cactus spines. Each noise sent her hand to her father's pistol, clutched like a talisman against the darkness. Dawn brought no comfort, only the stark reality of continued survival. Emily's stomach cramped with hunger. She had found nothing to eat the previous day except a handful of prickly pear fruits that had done little to sustain her. The need for food now competed with her fear of discovery, forcing her to consider leaving the relative safety of the creek's vegetation to hunt for sustenance. The decision was made for her when she discovered the creek bed had run dry several miles ahead. The water disappeared into the porous desert soil. With no choice but to abandon her planned route, Emily turned southeast toward a line of hills where she hoped to find both higher ground to orient herself and perhaps game to hunt. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as the day progressed. Emily's leather shoes, designed for a Philadelphia schoolgirl rather than a desert traveler, began to split at the seams. Blisters formed and broke, each step becoming an exercise in endurance. Yet she pressed on, Samuel Mitchell's oft-repeated family motto echoing in her mind, "Mitchells don't surrender." By mid-afternoon, Emily had reached the foothills and managed to bring down a desert hare with a well-placed shot from her father's pistol. The single bullet was a precious expenditure. She had only 5 remaining in the chamber, and no additional ammunition. She skinned the animal with her small pocket knife as her father had taught her, her hands shaking with hunger and fatigue. Without matches to light a fire, she forced herself to eat the meat raw, gagging at first, but then consuming it with the desperate efficiency of true hunger. The hare's pelt she kept, knowing it might prove useful as the desert nights grew cold. As Emily continued her journey, signs of human presence began to appear. An abandoned mining claim, the remains of a campfire several days old, a rusted tin can half buried in sand. These traces of civilization provided both hope and anxiety. She was approaching areas where people might be found, but she had no way of knowing whether they would be friend or foe. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, exhaustion and dehydration took their toll. Emily's vision began to blur, her steps becoming unsteady. She stumbled over a piece of exposed limestone, falling hard onto the rocky ground. The impact sent waves of pain through her already battered body. But worse was the sound of her father's pocket watch breaking as it took the brunt of her fall. When she managed to extract it from her dress pocket, she found the crystal shattered, and the hands frozen at 10:27, the approximate time the Blackwell gang had attacked their homestead. The symbolism wasn't lost on Emily, and for the first time since her escape, she allowed herself to weep openly, great racking sobs that echoed across the empty landscape. It was in this moment of utter vulnerability that she first sensed she was being watched. Emily froze, tears still wet on her cheeks, her hand instinctively moving toward the pistol tucked into the waistband of her dress. Slowly, she raised her head, scanning the surrounding terrain with the heightened awareness of prey, sensing a predator. Nothing moved among the scattered rocks and sparse vegetation, yet the feeling persisted, eyes observing her from somewhere in the sun-baked landscape. For long minutes, she remained motionless, straining her senses against the afternoon stillness. Then, from behind a stand of cholla cactus, perhaps 50 yards away, a figure emerged. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a curious mixture of Apache and white man's clothing, buckskin leggings, and a calico shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a red bandana tied around his neck. His black hair was cut shorter than traditional Apache style, but still fell to his shoulders, framing a face dominated by high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He carried a Winchester rifle casually in one hand, but it wasn't pointed at her. Around his waist was a belt with a holstered revolver and a sheathed knife, marking him as well-armed but not immediately threatening. Emily raised her pistol, her hand steadier than she would have expected, given her exhaustion and fear. "Stay where you are," she commanded, her voice rough from disuse and thirst. The man stopped, regarding her with an expression that wasn't quite a smile. "That gun has only 5 bullets left," he observed in perfect, unaccented English. "And you're holding it too tight. Squeeze the trigger wrong. You'll miss even at this distance." The accuracy of his assessment startled Emily. "How long have you been following me?" "Since yesterday morning," he replied with the same unsettling directness. "You passed within 10 feet of where I was resting and never saw me. Made too much noise walking. Scared away game for half a mile around." Emily kept the pistol leveled at his chest, though her arm had begun to tremble with the effort. "Are you with them? The Blackwell gang?" Something dangerous flickered across the man's face, not anger directed at her, but a cold hatred at the mention of the name. "If I was Blackwell's man, you'd already be dead. Or worse." "Then who are you?" "Daniel Nietzsche." He shifted his weight, slightly, his posture becoming less formal. My father was a chief among the Chiricahua. My mother was the daughter of a cavalry officer at Fort Bowie. He nodded toward her pistol. You should lower that before you waste a bullet or hurt yourself. If I wanted to harm you, I'd have done it while you slept last night. The knowledge that he had been close enough to observe her sleeping should have terrified Emily, but instead it produced an odd sense of relief. He had had ample opportunity to attack, yet had not done so. Slowly, she lowered the pistol. "Why are you tracking me?" she asked, still wary. "Wasn't tracking you specifically," Daniel replied. "Was following the men who burned out 3 homesteads, northeast of here. Found your family's place, saw signs that someone had escaped." He studied her with professional assessment. "You've done better than most would. Still, another day without water, and I'd have been burying you instead of talking to you." The blunt statement hit Emily with the force of truth. She was at the limits of her endurance, and they both knew it. "I'm trying to reach Willow Springs," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "My father had friends there." Daniel Nietzsche shook his head slightly. "Willow Springs is still 15 miles east. You're headed southeast into Apache territory. Army patrols, but also renegade bands who'd see that hair of yours as a trophy." He gestured to her strawberry blonde locks, now matted with dust and sweat. Emily's legs suddenly felt incapable of supporting her weight. She sank to the ground, the full impact of her situation crashing down upon her. Not only had she failed to follow the correct route to safety, but she had been walking directly into new danger. Daniel approached cautiously, stopping a respectful distance away. From a pouch at his belt, he removed a small canteen and offered it to her. "Small sips," he advised. "Too much at once will make you sick." The water was warm, but clean. Emily forced herself to drink slowly, though her body screamed for more. When she had taken several careful sips, she handed the canteen back, studying Daniel more carefully. Despite his formidable appearance, there was something in his expression that suggested understanding rather than threat. "Those men killed my entire family," she said quietly. "My father, mother, brother, and twin sisters, took everything of value and burned our home." Daniel's face remained impassive, but something in his eyes responded to her pain. "The Blackwell gang has been doing the same all through the territory. Army can't catch them. Local law won't try." He paused, seeming to weigh a decision. "I've been hunting them for 3 months." Emily felt a flicker of something beyond grief and fear, a spark of purpose. "Why are you hunting them?" Daniel Nietzsche's expression hardened, revealing a glimpse of the warrior beneath his controlled exterior. "They raided a peaceful Apache camp near the San Pedro River, killed children, elders, took trophies." His hand tightened on his rifle. "My sister's family was among them." The connection between them crystallized in that moment, 2 survivors linked by a common enemy, by comparable loss. Emily understood with sudden clarity that her path forward lay not in running away, but in a direction she had never anticipated. "I want to help you find them," she said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. Daniel Nietzsche's expression shifted from surprise to skepticism at Emily's declaration. "This isn't a children's game," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Tracking Blackwell means following men who kill without hesitation or mercy." "I know exactly what they're capable of," Emily replied, her jaw set in determination despite her exhausted state. "I watched them destroy everything I loved." Daniel studied her with the careful assessment of a man accustomed to making life or death judgments. After a long moment, he seemed to reach a decision. "First, you need shelter, food, water. Can't hunt killers if you can barely stand." He gestured toward the western horizon where the terrain rose into more substantial hills. "I have a camp, 3 miles from here. Not comfortable, but it's defendable and has a reliable spring." Emily gathered what little strength remained in her body and pushed herself to her feet. Pride wouldn't allow her to appear weaker than she already had. Lead the way. The journey to Daniel's camp tested Emily's endurance beyond what she thought possible. Each step sent jolts of pain through her blistered feet, and the continued exposure to the elements had left her lightheaded and disoriented. Twice she stumbled, and the second time Daniel silently offered his arm for support. After a brief, internal struggle, she accepted it. The camp proved to be a natural cave set into a hillside, its entrance partially concealed by a growth of mesquite and creosote bush. Inside, the temperature dropped immediately, providing blessed relief from the relentless sun. The space was perhaps 15 feet deep and 10 wide, with a small fire pit positioned near the entrance where smoke could escape without filling the shelter. Rest, Daniel instructed, pointing to a bed of grasses covered with a cavalry blanket that occupied one corner. I'll get water. Too exhausted to protest, Emily sank onto the makeshift bed. The relative coolness and dimness of the cave enveloped her like a balm. Before Daniel had even left the cave, she had fallen into the first deep sleep she'd experienced since the attack. When Emily awoke, the quality of light filtering through the cave entrance suggested early evening. A small fire burned in the pit, over which a battered coffee pot steamed gently. Daniel sat cross-legged nearby, cleaning a revolver with methodical precision. "You slept almost 6 hours," he said, without looking up from his task. "There's coffee, jerky, and some corn cakes in that pouch." Emily's stomach clenched at the mention of food. She moved stiffly to the fire and found the promised provisions. The jerky was tough but flavorful, the corn cake simple but substantial. The coffee, though bitter without milk or sugar, provided a warmth and energy she desperately needed. As she ate, Daniel continued his work in silence, reassembling the revolver with practiced hands. Only when she had finished her meal did he speak again. "There's a spring just outside where you can wash," he said, still without meeting her gaze, a courtesy that Emily recognized as respect for her dignity. "Left some soap and clean clothes. Won't fit well, but better than what you're wearing." The opportunity to wash away days of dust, sweat, and dried tears struck Emily as an unexpected luxury. The spring proved to be a small pool fed by a trickle of water emerging from the rocks, not large enough to immerse herself in, but sufficient for a thorough cleaning. The soap was rough-hewn and unscented, clearly handmade, but effective. The clothing Daniel had provided was indeed too large. A man's cotton shirt, a pair of boys' trousers that had been patched multiple times, and a leather belt to keep them from falling off her slender frame. There were also moccasins, surprisingly close to her size, crafted from soft deer hide. When Emily returned to the cave, feeling more human than she had in days, she found Daniel had laid out several items on a square of canvas. A small knife, in a leather sheath, a canteen, a packet of matches wrapped in oilcloth, and a leather pouch containing what appeared to be dried berries and nuts. "Survival kit," he explained, "for when we move on." He finally looked directly at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Still determined to help track Blackwell?" "Yes," Emily replied without hesitation. "But I know I'd be a liability as I am now. I need to learn how to move in this country, how to find water, how to stay alive." She gestured to the items he'd assembled. "Will you teach me?" Something resembling approval flickered across Daniel's features. "Most whites I've met would rather die than learn Apache ways." "Most whites haven't seen their entire family murdered in front of them," Emily countered. "I don't care where knowledge comes from if it helps me find justice." Daniel nodded, slowly. "Fair enough, we start tomorrow." The next week passed in a blur of instruction, practice, and gradual recovery. Daniel proved to be a demanding but remarkably patient teacher. He showed Emily how to walk leaving minimal tracks, how to identify plants that stored water, how to recognize signs of game and predators alike. Each morning began before dawn with weapons training. Emily already knew the basics of shooting from her father, But Daniel taught her to care for the pistol properly, to conserve ammunition, and to supplement the gun with other weapons, particularly the knife, which would never run out of bullets. A knife is only as good as the hand that holds it, he told her, demonstrating grip techniques, but it's silent, doesn't jam, and can be used for more than fighting. In the afternoons, when the desert heat made physical activity dangerous, they would retreat to the coolness of the cave, where Daniel shared knowledge of a different sort, information about the Blackwell gang, gleaned from both official sources, and his own tracking. Blackwell's real name is Frederick Harland, he explained one afternoon, sketching a crude map in the dirt floor of the cave. Was a Union officer during the war, disgraced for selling army supplies to civilians. Disappeared. For years, reappeared in Texas with a new name and a gang of former soldiers and criminals. Emily absorbed every detail, mentally cataloguing the names and descriptions of the gang members, their known haunts, their methods of operation. According to Daniel's intelligence, they had established a pattern of striking, isolated homesteads and small settlements, then retreating to hideouts in the mountains along the Arizona-Mexico border. "Why don't the authorities catch them?" Emily asked. "If their pattern is so clear?" Daniel's expression darkened. "Some officials are paid to look the other way. Others are afraid. Blackwell leaves few witnesses, and those who do survive often disappear before they can testify." He paused, adding meaningfully, "And some don't care much when the victims are Apache or Mexican. Only when white settlers are attacked does the army take serious notice." As the days passed, Emily found herself not only growing stronger physically, but also developing a new awareness of her surroundings. The desert, which had initially seemed a hostile wasteland, revealed itself as a complex ecosystem filled with subtle indicators for those who knew how to read them. She learned that the pattern of bird flights could indicate the presence of water, that certain plants grew only in soil types that might support digging for roots or tubers, that even the angle of rock weathering could tell a story about prevailing winds and potential shelter. Daniel, for his part, seemed to find unexpected satisfaction in teaching. Though he rarely spoke of his past, occasional comments revealed that he had lived in both worlds, trained in traditional Apache ways by his father's people, educated in reading, writing, and white man's knowledge at a mission school where his mother had connections, always caught between, he remarked one evening as they watched the sunset from the cave entrance. "Not Apache enough for some, not white enough for others. Learn to take what was useful from both, discard the rest." On the 8th day, as Emily successfully tracked a desert tortoise using only the subtle signs Daniel had taught her, he announced that it was time to move on. "You're ready enough," he said, watching as she correctly identified the tortoise's burrow. "Not expert, but you'll survive if we get separated." "Where are we headed?" Emily asked, containing her excitement at this. "Vote of confidence. Settlement called Copper Springs," Daniel replied. "Trading post there run by a man named Jenkins. Not a friend exactly, but he owes me a favor. More importantly, he hears things, news about Blackwell's movements that doesn't reach official channels." That evening, as they prepared for departure, the following morning, Emily found herself contemplating how dramatically her world had changed in just 2 weeks. The city girl who had arrived in Arizona with dreams of a simple farming life had been replaced by something harder, more focused, more attuned to the harsh realities of frontier existence. She no longer jumped at the howl of coyotes or the rustling of night creatures. Her hands had developed new calluses from knife practice and gathering firewood. Her skin had darkened under the desert sun, and her once soft muscles had become wiry and resilient. Yet the most profound change was internal. The paralyzing grief and shock had not disappeared, but had crystallized into something controlled and purposeful. Each skill she mastered, each piece of knowledge she absorbed, became another step toward the reckoning she sought. As darkness settled over the desert, Emily removed her father's broken pocket watch from the small bundle of possessions she had managed to keep. The hands remained frozen at 10:27, the crystal shattered, a permanent reminder of all she had lost. Tomorrow they would leave this temporary sanctuary and begin the true hunt for the Blackwell gang. Emily tucked the watch carefully back among her belongings, a talisman of both memory and purpose. "Time to sleep," Daniel advised from across the fire. "Long journey starts at first light." They departed at dawn, traveling light but prepared. Daniel had wrapped cornmeal, dried meat and parched corn in oilcloth packets small enough to fit in their pockets. Water was the heaviest burden, 2 canteens each, to be refilled whenever opportunity allowed. Emily wore the moccasins Daniel had provided, finding them remarkably comfortable compared to her deteriorated leather shoes. "Copper Springs is 3 days northeast," Daniel explained as they set out. "Slow going through Badlands, but safer route. Less chance of army patrols. Or Blackwell scouts." The mention of army patrols as something to avoid rather than seek reminded Emily of Daniel's complicated position. Despite his assistance to her, he existed in a precarious space between worlds, neither fully accepted by white society nor fully integrated with the Apache who had retreated to reservations or continued resistance in the mountains. Their path took them through a landscape of increasing harshness, jagged ravines carved by ancient floods, fields of volcanic rock that shimmered in the heat, plateaus so barren they seemed more moonscape than earth. Yet Daniel navigated with unwavering confidence, identifying landmarks invisible to Emily's less trained eye. As they traveled, Emily noticed how Daniel would periodically scan the horizon with particular attention to the movement of birds and distant dust patterns. "Teaching me to read the land," she ventured during a brief rest in the shade of an overhanging cliff. Daniel nodded approvingly. "Good observation. Desert speaks constantly. Wind, animals, plants all carry messages. Survival depends on listening properly." "What are you listening for now?" she asked, taking a careful sip from her canteen. "Signs of pursuit," he admitted. "Blackwell has informants throughout the territory. If word reached them about a survivor from the Mitchell homestead, they might send men to eliminate witnesses." The frank assessment sent a chill through Emily, despite the oppressive heat. "How would they know I survived?" "Traders talk, prospectors, anyone passing near your homestead might have seen signs of your escape." Daniel resumed his scan of the horizon. "Or they might be tracking me. I've crossed paths with Blackwell's men before. They know I hunt them." This new information altered Emily's understanding of their situation. Not only were they pursuing dangerous men, but they might themselves be prey. She found herself instinctively checking her father's pistol, which Daniel had cleaned and loaded with the last of his .44 ammunition. Toward evening of the first day, they descended into a narrow arroyo where cottonwood trees suggested underground water. As Daniel had anticipated, a small spring bubbled up from between rocks, creating a shallow pool barely 3 feet across before disappearing back into the sandy soil. They made camp there, refilling canteens and washing away the days. Accumulated dust. Daniel showed Emily how to gather specific stones that would hold heat from their small, smokeless fire, then wrap them in the thin blanket she carried to provide warmth through the cool desert night. "No fire after dark," he instructed. "Light, and carries too far, attracts attention." As they ate a sparse meal of jerky and parched corn, Daniel unexpectedly broke their companionable silence. "Tell me about your family," he said, his tone gentler than Emily had yet heard from him. "Important to remember them as they lived, not just how they died." The invitation pierced Emily's carefully maintained composure. She had deliberately avoided dwelling on memories, focusing instead on survival and the mechanics of tracking. Now, watching the last daylight fade from the sky, she found herself speaking of her father's carpentry skills, her mother's talent, For making something nourishing from the most minimal ingredients, Thomas's dreams of building a cattle ranch once their homestead was established. The twins' identical laughs that could brighten even the most difficult days. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing but attention. When Emily finally fell silent, he nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "Good memories make strong medicine," he said. "Apache believes spirits of loved ones stay close when we honor their memory." He tapped his chest. "Carry them. Here, where no one can take them from you." The simple wisdom comforted Emily in a way that the conventional platitudes offered by her Philadelphia pastor never had. She slept more peacefully that night than any since the attack, wrapped in both her blanket and the memories she had allowed herself to revive. The second day brought terrain even more challenging than the first. They navigated a maze of slot, canyons where flash floods had carved narrow passages through sandstone, creating corridors sometimes barely wide enough for a person to pass sideways. The ground was littered with debris carried by previous floods, uprooted trees, boulders, even the occasional animal carcass trapped and mummified by the dry air. "Why this route?" Emily asked as they squeezed through a particularly tight passage. "Seems unnecessarily difficult." "No unnecessary difficulties in survival," Daniel responded. "This route has 3 advantages. Water seeps through sandstone, creating pockets of moisture. Canyon walls provide shade during hottest hours, and most importantly, no one expects travelers here. Hard to track, hard to pursue. By midday, they had emerged from the canyon system onto a plateau overlooking a vast expanse of desert. In the far distance, Emily could make out a thin line of green that suggested a river or creek. Beyond that, barely visible through the heat haze, stood purple mountains. "Apache lands," Daniel said, following her gaze toward the mountains. "My father's people controlled that range for centuries before white settlers came. Now they're confined to reservation at San Carlos or hiding in Mexico." There was no bitterness in his voice, merely a stating of facts. Yet Emily sensed the complex emotions beneath his neutral tone. "Do you ever visit the reservation?" she asked. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "Once a year. Bring supplies, medicine, see my father's sister who refused to flee to Mexico." He adjusted his rifle strap with unnecessary precision. "Agency officials, watch me closely. Man who walks between worlds is never trusted fully." As they continued across the plateau, Emily considered how similar their positions had become. Both displaced from their original communities, both marked by violence, both existing now in an indeterminate space, defined more by purpose than belonging. They made camp that night beneath an overhanging rock formation that provided natural shelter. As Emily gathered fuel for their small cooking fire, she noticed scratched images on the underside of the overhang, stick figures engaged in what appeared to be a hunting scene, alongside geometric patterns and handprints. "Ancient ones," Daniel explained, seeing her interest. "Lived here long before Apache, before Spanish, before anyone. Left messages in rock for those who came after." Emily studied the primitive art with newfound appreciation. "What do they say?" "This was home," Daniel translated, running his fingers lightly over the images. "We hunted here, gathered here, lived well." He pointed to a spiral pattern near the center. "This symbol means water nearby, still accurate after perhaps 1,000 years. The connection to people long vanished, yet still communicating across centuries, struck Emily profoundly. She thought of her own family's humble cabin, now reduced to ashes, and wondered what messages they had left behind that might endure. On the morning of the 3rd day, Daniel's demeanor changed subtly. He checked his weapons more frequently, altered their course several times based on signs Emily couldn't discern, and maintained longer periods of silence. By midday, he finally explained his concern. "We're being followed," he said matter-of-factly as they paused in the shadow of a large boulder. Two men keeping distance, trying to stay downwind. Emily's hand moved instinctively to her pistol. Blackwell's men. Daniel shook his head slightly. Don't think so, moving too cautiously. Blackwell's men would attack directly, with numbers. These two are tracking, not pursuing yet. He studied the back trail with narrowed eyes. Might be bounty hunters. Territory has price on Apache heads, $50 for man, $25 for woman or child. The casual mention of such barbarism shocked Emily despite everything she had already witnessed. That's monstrous, she whispered. That's frontier justice, Daniel corrected without emotion. To some, only good Apache is dead Apache, he considered. Their options, then made a decision. We change plans. Too dangerous to continue to Copper Springs if being tracked. Need to identify followers first. Determine their purpose. How do we do that? Emily asked. Set a trap, Daniel replied, a grim smile briefly crossing his features. Use their expectations against them. The plan Daniel devised was both simple and ingenious. Rather than continuing to flee from their pursuers, they would create a false camp, complete with evidence of their presence, then double back to observe whoever came to investigate. Oldest trick, Daniel explained as they worked, but effective if done correctly. People see what they expect to see. They selected a small box canyon with only one entrance as their staging ground. Within an hour, they had assembled a convincing campsite. A small fire pit with still warm coals, 2 bedrolls positioned near the protective canyon wall, and subtle signs of human activity scattered about. Emily watched as Daniel deliberately placed items to create a specific impression. Her oversized shirt hung on a rock as if set out to dry. A coffee tin positioned near the fire, even boot prints leading into the canyon, but none leading out, achieved by Daniel walking backward while brushing away his forward tracks. Now we wait, he said, leading Emily to a concealed position on the ridge above the canyon entrance. They settled into a natural depression in the rock, well hidden by scrub brush, yet offering a clear view of both the false camp and the approach to it. The afternoon heat intensified as they lay motionless, conserving energy and water. Emily fought against restlessness, practicing the patience Daniel had emphasized during her training. She focused on controlling her breathing, remaining still, despite the discomfort of rocks pressing against her ribs. After nearly 3 hours, their vigilance was rewarded. 2 figures approached cautiously from the direction they had traveled earlier, men dressed in the practical attire of frontier travelers, but with subtle differences that marked them as something other than typical. Settlers or prospectors. Both carried Sharps rifles with telescopic sights, expensive weapons favored by professional hunters. Their clothing, though dusty from travel, was of higher quality than most frontier wear. Most tellingly, they moved with the disciplined caution of men accustomed to tracking dangerous prey. Not bounty hunters, Daniel whispered, his mouth close. To Emily's ear, Army scouts or perhaps Pinkerton agents. The men approached the canyon with textbook tactical awareness, one covering with his rifle while the other advanced in short bursts of movement. When they reached the entrance, they conferred briefly before one remained outside as a lookout while the other entered to investigate the camp. The scout inside moved from the fire pit to the bedrolls, examining each item with methodical thoroughness. He picked up Emily's shirt, studying it before replacing it precisely as he had found it. His companion maintained his vigilance, scanning the surrounding terrain with practiced eyes. "They're good," Daniel murmured with professional appreciation. "Experienced trackers." Emily felt a surge of anxiety. "Will they spot us?" Daniel shook his head slightly. "Not if we remain still. Sun's position works in our favor. They'd have to look directly into it to see this ridge." The scout inside the canyon completed his examination and rejoined his partner. They engaged in an intense discussion, occasionally gesturing toward the camp and then in various directions. After several minutes, they appeared to reach a decision. The taller of the two removed a notebook from his shirt pocket, wrote something, then wedged the paper beneath a rock near the fire pit. "Message," Daniel observed. "Interesting." Once the men departed, continuing along the false trail Daniel had laid beyond the canyon, he and Emily waited an additional half-hour to ensure they were truly gone before descending to inspect the campsite. The note, written in a precise hand on quality paper, contained an unexpected message. "Miss Mitchell, your survival has been reported to proper authorities. We represent interests concerned for your safety. Proceed to Fort Buchanan for protection and to provide testimony regarding the Blackwell gang's activities. Further pursuit is inadvisable and dangerous." It was signed simply U.S. Marshal Service. Emily read the note twice, her heart pounding. "They know who I am," she whispered. "How is that possible?" Daniel's expression remained neutral, but his posture had tensed. "Question isn't how they know your identity," he said, studying the note with narrowed eyes. "Your question is whether they're truly marshals." "You think it's a trap?" Emily asked, understanding his suspicion. "Possibly. Blackwell has connections in territorial government, might use official channels as cover." He carefully folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. Or they could be legitimate marshals, but working with corrupt officials. "But they might also be exactly what they claim," Emily pointed out. "Real marshals trying to help." Daniel acknowledged this with a slight nod. "True. Need more information before deciding." He surveyed their surroundings, thinking through the implications. Copper Springs, still closest settlement. Jenkins might know about martial activity in the territory. Night was approaching, making further travel dangerous in the rocky terrain. They established a new camp several miles from the canyon, concealed within a thicket of mesquite that provided both protection from observation and natural shelter. As they prepared a cold meal of jerky and dried fruit, Emily contemplated the message and its implications. If legitimate authorities knew she had survived, it created both opportunities and complications. Official testimony might help bring the Blackwell gang to justice through legal channels, something her father, with his respect for proper law, would have advocated. Yet the prospect of abandoning her partnership with Daniel, of passively waiting for others to deliver justice rather than actively pursuing it, stirred a resistance in her that surprised her with its intensity. "What would you do?" she asked Daniel as they huddled in the growing darkness. "If you were in my position?" He considered this thoughtfully, taking time to formulate his response. "Depends on what you seek," he finally answered. "If testimony and legal justice enough for you, Fort Buchanan's safest option. Army protection, civilized accommodation, return to white society." He paused, then added without judgment, "If you seek more direct resolution, then different path necessary." "What do you mean by direct resolution?" Emily pressed, though she suspected she already knew. Daniel met her gaze steadily. "Blackwell and his men have evaded legal justice for years. Corrupt officials, intimidated witnesses, remote hideouts, all work in their favor. System designed to protect men like him, not victims. So you're suggesting we find them ourselves? What then? I'm a 14-year-old girl and you're—" She hesitated, not wanting to articulate the prejudices that would face an Apache attempting to bring charges against white criminals. "Exactly," Daniel concluded for her. "System not designed for justice in cases like ours. So, question becomes not what I would do, but what you can live with afterward." The profound nature of the choice before her settled over Emily like a physical weight. She removed her father's broken pocket watch from her pocket, running her thumb over its shattered face, in what had become an unconscious habit when facing difficult decisions. Samuel Mitchell had been a man who believed in law, in civilizations, structures and processes. He had moved his family west, not to escape society, but to build a new version of it on frontier soil. What would he advise his daughter in this moment? Yet Emily also recognized that her father's world, the world of clear moral boundaries and functioning justice, had been shattered as completely as the watch crystal. The Arizona Territory operated by different rules, where official channels could be as corrupted as the criminals they supposedly pursued. "I need to see this through," she finally said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Whatever path that requires, I can't just give testimony and hope someone else delivers justice." Daniel studied her face in the dim starlight, searching for doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he nodded once, accepting her decision. "Then we continue to Copper Springs tomorrow, gather intelligence, determine which marshals trustworthy, which corrupted." He added more wood to their small fire, which was sheltered enough to risk continuing through the night. "Get sleep. Tomorrow we enter more populated areas. Different dangers there." As Emily settled into her blanket, her mind cycled through the implications of the day's discoveries. They were being tracked by people with official authority. Whether legitimate or corrupted remained to be seen. The simple narrative of pursuing Blackwell had become entangled in a web of territorial politics and law enforcement interests. She drifted towards sleep, with the unsettling realization that justice might prove even more elusive than the men who had destroyed her family, hidden not just in remote mountain hideouts, but in the very institutions designed to protect settlers like the Mitchells. Her last conscious thought was of her father, wondering if he would recognize the person his daughter was becoming in this unforgiving landscape. A person increasingly willing to operate outside the structures and beliefs he had valued throughout his life. They reached Copper Springs by midday. The settlement barely deserved the name, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a natural spring that had attracted miners searching for the metal that gave the place its name. The copper vein had played out years ago, but the settlement had persisted as a trading post and way station for travelers crossing the territory. Daniel instructed Emily to pull her hat low and keep her head down as they approached. "Young white girl traveling with Apache attracts attention," he explained. "Better if fewer people remember your face." The trading post occupied the largest building, a two-story structure with a covered porch, where several men lounged on benches, observing newcomers with the automatic wariness of frontier inhabitants. A hand-painted sign proclaimed, "Jenkins General Merchandise, Fair Trades, No Credit." "Wait here," Daniel told Emily, positioning her in a shadowed spot beside the building. "Jenkins knows me, but others might ask questions." Emily nodded, understanding the precaution. Though she had adapted remarkably to wilderness survival over the past weeks, she remained conscious of how her presence complicated Daniel's movements. In settlements like this, where anti-Indian sentiment often ran high, Daniel entered the store alone, the screen door creaking shut behind him. Through the open window, Emily could hear the murmur of voices, a gruff greeting followed by more subdued conversation she couldn't quite make out. After approximately 15 minutes, Daniel re-emerged, his expression revealing nothing as he gestured for her to follow him around the back of the building. A narrow staircase led to the second floor, where Jenkins apparently maintained private quarters. The trader himself met them at the top, a barrel-chested man with a grey-streaked beard and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent decades under the southwestern sun. His right sleeve was pinned empty at the shoulder, the legacy of some past violence. "So you're the Mitchell girl," Jenkins said without preamble, studying Emily with sharp blue eyes. "Heard about the raid on your homestead. Brutal business." He stepped aside, ushering them into a simply furnished room that served as both office and living quarters. "Naicha says you're hunting Blackwell rather than seeking army protection. Bold choice for one so young." Not a choice, a necessity, Emily replied, meeting his gaze directly. Official channels seem compromised when it comes to Blackwell. Jenkins gave a short, humorless laugh. Perceptive assessment. Please sit. He gestured toward a small table where a pot of coffee steamed, alongside 3 tin cups. Blackwell operates with surprising impunity. Makes one wonder about his connections. As they settled at the table, Jenkins poured coffee for each of them, then produced a bottle of whiskey from a desk drawer, adding a generous splash to his own cup. He offered the bottle to Daniel, who declined with a slight shake of his head. Your Marshall friends passed through yesterday, Jenkins informed them, confirming Daniel's suspicion that they would head for the nearest settlement. Marshal Wilson and Deputy Carlyle showed badges, asked questions about any survivors from the Mitchell homestead, seemed particularly interested in whether any young girl had been seen in the area. Did you tell them about us? Emily asked. Jenkins sipped his coffee, considering her over the rim of his cup. Told them I hadn't seen any survivors, which was true at the time. Didn't mention Night's interest in Blackwell either. Man's entitled to his privacy. He set his cup down with deliberate care. That said, they seemed legitimate. Wilson has a reputation as a straight arrow, been working the Arizona territory for 5 years, not known to be in anyone's pocket. Yet they knew about Miss Mitchell's survival when no official report has been filed, Daniel pointed out. Source of that information matters, Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. Fair point. They mentioned receiving word from a prospector who'd seen signs of a survivor near your burned-out homestead, then later heard rumors of an Apache traveling with a white girl. Didn't specify how they connected those dots to you specifically. Emily exchanged glances with Daniel, the implication clear. Someone had identified her with surprising precision, despite their precautions. Blackwell was in Tucson 3 days ago, Jenkins continued, shifting the conversation, brazenly dining at the Silver Dollar Saloon, acting like a respected businessman rather than a wanted criminal. Left heading south toward the border. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Any word on his current camp? Rumors place him near Diablo Canyon. Jenkins traced a location on a faded map, spread beneath a glass tabletop. Abandoned mining operation. There provides good defensive position, access to water. 15, maybe 20 men with him, according to freight drivers who've spotted activity in the area. Emily studied the map, noting the canyon's position relative to Copper Springs, perhaps 2 days' journey southwest in rugged country near the Mexican border. The strategic advantages of such a location were obvious, offering multiple escape routes if threatened. What about these marshals, she asked. Where were they headed? Said they were continuing to Fort Buchanan to report and request additional manpower. Jenkins scratched his beard thoughtfully. If they're planning an operation against Blackwell, they didn't share those details with a one-armed shopkeeper. As the men continued discussing possible approaches to Diablo Canyon, Emily found her attention drawn to a stack of newspapers on Jenkins's desk. The topmost was the Arizona Citizen, dated just 1 week earlier. A headline halfway down the front page caught her eye. Territorial Governor appoints Special Commission on Frontier Violence. She rose quietly and moved to the desk, scanning the article. The governor had apparently formed a commission to investigate depredations against peaceful settlers and propose solutions to the ongoing Indian problem. The language made the bias clear. Violence against white settlers warranted investigation, while violence against native peoples wasn't even acknowledged. More interesting was the list of commission members, prominent territorial businessmen, military officers and government officials. Among them, serving as commission secretary, was a name that sent a chill through Emily. Lawrence Thorne. Mr. Jenkins, she interrupted the men's conversation. Who is Lawrence Thorne? Jenkins and Daniel both turned toward her with expressions of surprise. Where did you hear that name? Jenkins asked. He's listed here as Secretary of the Governor's Commission on Frontier Violence, Emily explained, pointing to the newspaper. Jenkins exchanged a significant look with Daniel before responding. Thorne is what you might call a fixer, handles problems for wealthy interests in the territory, mining companies, railroad investors, land speculators, has connections throughout territorial government and a reputation for resolving issues by whatever means necessary. He works for Blackwell, Daniel added flatly. Or more accurately, for the same people Blackwell works for. Never directly involved. In raids but coordinates, provides intelligence, arranges for stolen goods to be moved and sold. The pieces suddenly aligned in Emily's mind. He was there, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. At our homestead, giving orders to the others, grey streak in his hair, silver belt buckle. I saw him. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Emily had witnessed not just a simple bandit raid, but an operation directed by someone connected to the highest levels of territorial government. Her testimony wouldn't just implicate Blackwell, it would potentially expose corruption, reaching to the governor's office itself. This changes our calculation, Daniel said quietly. Thorne has resources beyond Blackwell's gang. Access to telegraph, influence with army officers, connections throughout the territory. Jenkins drained his coffee, grimacing at the now cold liquid. Explains the marshal's interest too. If they're honest, they're following a bigger conspiracy than isolated raids. If they're compromised, they're working to eliminate witnesses who could expose that conspiracy. Emily felt the weight of this new understanding. She wasn't just a survivor seeking justice for her family. She was a threat to powerful men with the means and motivation to silence her permanently. We need to determine which side these marshals are on, she said, returning to the table. Before we decide our next move. Jenkins considered this, then nodded decisively. I might have a way to test that. He rose and moved to a large iron safe in the corner, working the combination lock with his one hand. From inside, he withdrew a sealed envelope. Correspondence I've been holding for a federal investigator, man named Phillips, who's been gathering evidence on corruption in the territory for months. Was supposed to collect it next week. He held up the envelope. Contains records of payments from mining interests to territorial officials, including notes on Blackwell's activities as an enforcer. Daniel immediately understood. If we deliver this to Wilson and Carlisle, their reaction tells us everything we need to know, Jenkins finished. Either they act on legitimate evidence of corruption, or they bury it to protect their patrons. Emily looked between the two men, seeing the dangerous logic of the plan. You're suggesting we use ourselves as bait. No, Daniel corrected, not ourselves. Me. He turned to Jenkins. I'll approach the marshals alone. Safer that way. Absolutely not, Emily protested. We stay together. Daniel's expression softened fractionally. Your safety matters more than mine in this fight. You're the witness, the evidence. I'm just the tracker. You're a lot more than that, Emily responded with unexpected fierceness. And I'm not letting you face potential corrupt lawmen alone, just because I'm white and you're Apache. The directness of her statement silenced both men momentarily. Jenkins recovered first, a hint of admiration in his weathered features. Brave stance, Miss Mitchell, but Nietzsche has the right of it. Your testimony is what threatens Thorne and his allies. You need to remain hidden while we determine if these marshals can be trusted. Emily wanted to argue further, but the logic was undeniable. Her safety had larger implications than her personal desires. With reluctance, she nodded her acceptance. One day, Jenkins proposed, Daniel approaches the marshals at Fort Buchanan with the documents. If they're legitimate, they'll act on the evidence. If not, he left the consequence unspoken. If not, Daniel completed grimly, I don't return, and you take Miss Mitchell through Apache Pass to Tucson. I have friends there who can get her safely to California, beyond territorial jurisdiction. The plan settled among them with the weight of lives balanced on uncertain trust. As Jenkins refilled their coffee cups, Emily found herself studying the newspaper again, memorizing the faces in a grainy photograph of the governor's commission. If Daniel was right about the connection between Thorne, Blackwell, and territorial officials, then her family had died not in a random act of frontier violence, but as part of a calculated strategy to eliminate homesteaders whose claims interfered with larger financial interests. The realization transformed her understanding of justice. This wasn't just about punishing the men who had pulled the triggers, but exposing the system that had directed their actions. A far more dangerous endeavor, with far more powerful enemies. Dawn found Emily helping Jenkins organize supplies in the trading post's storeroom, a task designed to keep her occupied and hidden while Daniel prepared for his journey to Fort Buchanan. The windowless room, filled with barrels of flour, sacks of coffee beans, and shelves of canned goods, provided both security and distraction. "Been meaning to inventory this mess for months," Jenkins remarked as they worked. "One armed man appreciates the assistance." Despite the mundane nature of the task, Emily's mind remained fixed on Daniel's impending mission and the dangers it entailed. She checked the loading of her father's pistol for the third time that morning, a nervous habit that didn't escape Jenkins' notice. "Nietzsche knows what he's doing," the trader assured her, correctly interpreting her anxiety. "Best tracker in the territory, and smarter than most white men I've met. If anyone can assess these marshals without getting caught, it's him." "It's not his abilities I doubt," Emily replied, returning the pistol to her waistband. "It's whether anyone, even Daniel, can safely test corrupted lawmen who might be watching for exactly this kind of approach." Jenkins paused in his counting of ammunition boxes. "Trust cuts both ways, Miss Mitchell. He's taking this risk because he trusts your testimony is worth protecting. Question is, do you trust his judgment enough to let him do what he thinks necessary?" The challenge in the older man's voice gave Emily pause. Throughout her life, decisions had been made for her, by parents, by teachers, by the social conventions that governed a young girl's existence. Even her flight from the homestead had been directed by her mother's final instructions. The past weeks with Daniel had marked her first experience of genuine partnership, of having her observations and suggestions taken seriously despite her age and gender. "I trust him," she acknowledged finally. "I just don't want anyone else dying because of me." Jenkins' weathered face softened. "Way I see it, Blackwell and his backers are responsible for the dying, not you. Sometimes surviving is the hardest job of all. Living to tell truths others want buried." Their conversation was interrupted by Daniel's entrance. He had exchanged his distinctive combination of Apache and white clothing for the anonymous attire of a frontier worker: faded canvas trousers, a checked shirt beneath a dusty vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. Only his moccasins remained, practical footwear that would leave less distinctive tracks than boots. "Jenkins's horse is saddled out back," he informed them. "Should reach the fort by evening if I ride steady." Emily approached him, conscious that this might be their last interaction if the marshals proved to be allied with Thorne and his conspirators. "Be careful," she said, the simple phrase inadequate to express the complexity of her concerns. Daniel acknowledged this with a slight nod, then unexpectedly removed the medicine pouch he wore around his neck. "Hold this until I return," he said, placing the small leather bag in her palm. "Apache believes such medicine protects the spirit. Yours now needs protection more than mine." The gesture's significance wasn't lost on Emily. She had observed how Daniel touched the pouch before making important decisions or facing difficult challenges, a connection to his heritage and personal power. "I'll guard it well," she promised, slipping the thong over her head. "If I'm not back by tomorrow noon, Daniel continued, his tone matter-of-fact rather than fatalistic. Assume the marshals can't be trusted. Jenkins will take you through Apache. Pass as we discussed. Jenkins cleared his throat. Got a message to my contact in Tucson this morning. They'll be expecting you if needed. He handed Daniel the sealed envelope containing the incriminating documents. This should be enough to test their intentions. Real marshals investigating corruption will recognize its value immediately. With nothing left to say, Daniel departed through the trading post's rear door, mounting the saddled horse with fluid grace. Emily watched from the small window as he rode away, his figure gradually diminishing against the vast landscape until he disappeared completely. Nothing to do now but wait, Jenkins observed, returning to his inventory. And stay out of sight. Better if my customers don't know you're here. The day crept forward with excruciating slowness. Emily assisted Jenkins with various tasks, mending burlap sacks, sorting merchandise, even helping to prepare a simple stew for their evening meal. The activities occupied her hands, but did little to calm her mind, which generated increasingly dire scenarios of Daniel's confrontation with the marshals. As evening approached, a commotion outside drew their attention. Jenkins peered cautiously through the front window, then motioned for Emily to remain hidden in the storeroom. "Riders coming in," he explained. "Stay quiet until I determine who they are." Emily retreated to the windowless space, leaving the door slightly ajar to hear Jenkins greet the newcomers. The trader's voice carried clearly, maintaining a casual tone that betrayed none of his concerns. "Evening, gentlemen. Trading posts about to close, but I can help with essentials if you're passing through." A deep voice responded, its cultured tones incongruous in the frontier setting. "Mr. Jenkins, I believe. I'm not here to trade. I'm looking for information about a young lady who might have passed this way. Survivor from a Homestead attack. North of here. Name of Mitchell." Emily's blood ran cold. The voice belonged to Lawrence Thorne, the man who had directed the raid on her family's homestead, now pursuing her personally. How had he tracked her to Copper Springs so quickly? "No survivors come through here," Jenkins replied evenly. "Heard about those raids, though. Terrible business. You with the territorial authorities investigating?" In a manner of speaking, Thorne's voice remained pleasant, almost cordial. "I represent the Governor's Special Commission on Frontier Violence. We're particularly interested in witnesses who might help us identify the perpetrators." "Wish I could help," Jenkins maintained. "Only visitors lately have been freight haulers and a couple of prospectors heading up to the Dragoons." A moment of silence followed, filled with unspoken tension. Then Thorne spoke again, his tone hardening slightly. "Mr. Jenkins, I should mention that harboring witnesses without reporting to territorial authorities is considered obstruction of justice. Serious charge for a man trying to maintain a business in this remote location." "No one to harbor, Mr. Thorne," Jenkins replied, an edge entering his voice. "Though I do wonder why the Governor's Commission is so interested in one survivor when dozens of settlers have been killed in similar raids. Almost seems like this particular witness must know something special." The veiled challenge hung in the air. Emily pressed herself deeper into the shadows of the storeroom, her hand finding Daniel's medicine pouch as if drawing strength from it. "We're interested in all relevant testimony," Thorne responded smoothly. "But information suggests this girl witnessed events that might help identify whether the attackers were renegade Apache or disguised whites claiming to be Indians. You understand how crucial such distinction is to territorial peace." "Indeed, I do," Jenkins agreed. "If I encounter any survivors, I'll be sure to direct them to proper authorities." The conversation continued briefly with Thorne, inquiring about other travelers in the area, particularly mentioning an Apache half-breed known to associate with territorial troublemakers. Jenkins maintained his ignorance, while Emily silently marveled at the trader's composure under pressure. Eventually the visitors departed, but Jenkins didn't immediately return to the storeroom. Nearly half an hour passed before he appeared at the door, his expression grim. "They're gone for now," he informed Emily. "Headed toward the spring to make camp, but left a man watching the trading post from the hillside across the way. Not very subtle about it either." "Thorn knows I'm alive," Emily whispered, the implications washing over her. "And he knows about Daniel." Jenkins nodded soberly. "Knows or suspects enough to come looking. Question is how he connected you to Copper Springs so specifically." The answer materialized in Emily's mind with chilling clarity. "The marshals. If they're working with Thorn, they could have reported finding our trail." "Possible," Jenkins acknowledged, "though there are other explanations. Thorn has informants throughout the territory, freighters, prospectors, ranch hands. Someone might have spotted you and Daniel traveling this direction." Regardless of the source, the immediate danger was undeniable. Thorn's presence complicated their already precarious situation, potentially cutting off their planned escape route through Apache Pass if Daniel failed to return. "We need to move you tonight," Jenkins decided. "Can't risk Thorn searching the trading post on some trumped-up authority from the governor's commission." "Where would I go?" Emily asked. "If they're watching the building." Jenkins smiled thinly. "Advantage of living in a played-out mining camp. Tunnels everywhere. Got one that leads from my cellar to an abandoned claim half a mile west. Used it during Apache troubles years back before the peace agreements." As they prepared for Emily's clandestine departure, gathering minimal supplies that could be carried easily, a new worry formed in her mind. "If Daniel returns, and I'm gone—" "Left a sign we arranged years ago," Jenkins assured her. "He'll know to follow the tunnel rather than approaching the trading post directly." The existence of such prearranged signals between Daniel and Jenkins spoke to a deeper history between the men than Emily had realized. "You've known him a long time," she observed. Jenkins paused in his preparations, a distant look crossing his features. "Since he was younger than you. His mother brought him to my previous trading post near Fort Bowie after his father was killed in a skirmish with soldiers. Helped them when others wouldn't serve half-breeds, as they called them." He gestured to his missing arm. "Years later he returned the favor when Apaches attacked my wagon, saved my life, lost the arm, but kept breathing thanks to him." This glimpse into Daniel's past added new dimensions to Emily's understanding of her unlikely protector. His navigation of two cultures, his connection to people like Jenkins, who judged character rather than heritage, the complex web of obligations and loyalties that defined his place in the territory. As darkness settled over Copper Springs, Jenkins led Emily through a trapdoor beneath a storage cabinet, down into a rough-hewn tunnel that smelled of damp earth and mineral deposits. Their single lantern cast elongated shadows against the timber supports and rock walls. "Stay quiet. Move carefully," Jenkins instructed. "Tunnel's solid enough but hasn't been maintained in years. When you reach the end, there's a small cabin built over the mine entrance. Wait there. Either Daniel or I will come by morning." With that, he handed her the lantern and turned back toward the trading post, leaving Emily alone in the narrow passageway with only wavering light and uncertain hopes to guide her forward. The abandoned mining cabin proved barely more than a shack. A single room with a sagging roof, its wood weathered to silver grey by years of sun and wind. A crude table and broken chair constituted the only furniture, while a pile of mouldering canvas in one corner suggested where the last occupant had slept. Emily set the lantern on the table, careful to keep its light away from the single window, which had been boarded over but still allowed thin strips of moonlight to penetrate between the planks. She secured the door with a wooden bar that lay nearby, though the rotting frame would hardly withstand a determined intruder. The tunnel entrance was concealed beneath a trapdoor covered with dirt and debris, blending seamlessly with the cabin's earthen floor. Emily took comfort in this hidden escape route, though returning to the dark passage alone held little appeal. Sleep proved impossible despite her exhaustion. Every creak of the settling structure, every whisper of wind against the walls triggered her vigilance. She positioned herself in the corner, with the best view of both the door and the tunnel entrance, her father's pistol ready in her lap. As the night deepened, Emily's thoughts turned to Daniel and his dangerous mission to Fort Buchanan. Had he reached the marshals safely? Had they proven trustworthy allies or revealed themselves as Thorne's accomplices? The uncertainty gnawed at her, compounded by the knowledge that Thorne himself now hunted her directly. Her fingers found Daniel's medicine pouch, tracing its intricate beadwork. The small leather bag felt inexplicably warm against her skin, as if it retained some essence of its owner's spirit. Emily wasn't sure if she believed in the medicine power Daniel had ascribed to it, but the tangible connection to her absent protector provided comfort in the desolate cabin. Morning arrived with agonizing slowness, heralded by roosters crowing in the distant settlement. Emily had dozed intermittently, never deeply enough to truly rest, but sufficient to muddle her thoughts. She splashed water from her canteen on her face, trying to clear her mind for whatever challenges the day might bring. By mid-morning, with no sign of either Daniel or Jenkins, Emily began to worry. She checked and rechecked her pistol, counted her meager supplies, and calculated how long she could reasonably remain in the cabin before hunger or thirst forced her to venture out. A sudden shadow passing across the strips of light from the boarded window froze her in place. Someone was outside. Emily lifted her pistol, moving silently to position herself beside the door rather than directly in front of it. 3 soft knocks sounded, followed by 2 harder ones. A pattern, intentional and specific. After a moment's hesitation, she called out, "Who's there?" "Your one-armed friend," Jenkins' voice replied quietly. Alone and unobserved. Emily unbarred the door, relief washing over her as the trader slipped. Inside, Jenkins carried a small sack that proved to contain bread, dried beef, and a canteen of fresh water. "Thorne's still in town," he reported without preamble. "Has 4 men with him, all armed like they're expecting trouble. Been asking questions all morning, offering money for information about you or Daniel." Emily accepted the food gratefully. "Any word from Daniel?" Jenkins shook his head. "Nothing yet. Fort's a half-day's ride each way, so no cause for alarm unless he's not back by evening." He studied her with concern. "You holding up all right in this place?" "I've managed in worse," Emily replied, thinking of her first desperate days after fleeing the homestead. Jenkins settled onto the broken chair, which creaked ominously beneath his weight. "Been thinking about Thorne's appearance. Timing's suspicious. Almost like he knew exactly when to arrive." "You think someone betrayed us?" Emily asked, the bread suddenly tasteless in her mouth. "Or he's got better intelligence than we realized?" Jenkins rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Territorial Telegraph Office is in Tucson, but military installations have their own lines. If Thorne has connections at Fort Buchanan..." The implication hung in the air between them. Daniel might be riding directly into a trap, one potentially set by the very marshals they hoped might be allies. Jenkins didn't linger, conscious that his extended absence from the trading post might arouse suspicion. "I'll return at dusk," he promised. "If Daniel hasn't shown by then, we implement the contingency plan, get you to Tucson through Apache territory." After Jenkins departed, the cabin seemed even more desolate than before. Emily paced the small space, mind racing through possibilities. If Daniel had been captured or killed, what were her options? Jenkins could help her reach Tucson. But then, what? How could a 14-year-old girl pursue justice against men who controlled the territorial government itself? As afternoon waned toward evening, Emily's anxiety intensified. She found herself checking the angle of sunlight through the boards obsessively, marking time's passage with growing dread. Daniel should have returned by now if all had gone according to plan. The sound came without warning, a horse approaching at a walk, its hoofbeats deliberately muffled. Emily extinguished the lantern and pressed herself against the wall beside the window, peering through a crack between boards. A rider dismounted several yards from the cabin, moving with the fluid grace she recognized immediately. Daniel. Relief flooded through her, only to freeze as she noticed how he carried himself, slightly hunched, one arm held protectively against his side. She unbarred the door and pulled it open just enough to whisper, "It's clear." Daniel slipped inside, and Emily barred the door behind him. In the dim light, she could see that his shirt was stained with blood along his right side, his face drawn with pain and exhaustion. "What happened?" she asked, helping him to the chair. "Marshals were compromised," he reported grimly, wincing, as he settled. "Wilson pretended interest in the documents, then tried to arrest me when I mentioned Thorne's name. Barely escaped." Emily retrieved her canteen, helping him drink before examining his wound. "You were shot?" "Grazed," Daniel corrected. "Clean hit through flesh only. Already stopped bleeding." Despite his assurance, the pallor of his skin suggested significant blood loss. As Emily tore strips from her petticoat to fashion fresh bandages, Daniel continued his report. "Wilson is definitely working with Thorne. Mentioned sending telegraph about the Mitchell girl before I escaped. Explains how Thorne found us so quickly. Jenkins said he's still in town with 4 men, Emily informed him as she bound his wound. Asking questions, offering rewards for information. Daniel absorbed this news with a slight nod. Changes our plans. Can't risk the Apache pass route if Thorne's watching. Need another way to Tucson. Jenkins mentioned a contingency plan, Emily offered. He's returning at dusk. A humorless smile touched Daniel's lips. Jenkins always has alternatives. Good man in dangerous country. He studied Emily's face, noting the dark circles beneath her eyes. You should rest while we can. Long journey ahead, regardless of route. Emily shook her head. Later, tell me exactly what happened at the fort. Daniel described his approach to Fort Buchanan, his initial meeting with the marshals that had seemed promising, and how the conversation had shifted once he provided Jenkins documents implicating territorial officials in corruption. Wilson asked detailed questions about where I obtained the papers, who else had seen them, grew especially interested when I mentioned a witness to the Mitchell Homestead attack. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, adjusting the fresh bandage. When I mentioned Thorne specifically, saw something in his eyes change, reached for his pistol while claiming he needed to secure the evidence. His escape had been narrow, slipping out a back window of the fort's administrative building while the marshals called for soldiers to assist in his capture. The bullet had caught him as he mounted his horse, but adrenaline had carried him beyond pursuit range before the wound began to seriously hamper him. Rode circuitous route back, he explained. Doubled back, used creek beds to hide tracks. Standard precautions, but took longer with the injury. Emily's respect for Daniel deepened as she realized what he had endured to return with this crucial intelligence. His wound, while not life-threatening, would have caused significant pain throughout the lengthy journey. Yet his primary concern remained completing the mission and warning her of the danger. As dusk approached, Daniel insisted on checking the surroundings despite his injury. Moving cautiously to the window, he scanned what was visible of the terrain through the gaps in the boards. "Something's wrong," he said suddenly, his body tensing. "Too quiet. No birds, no ground squirrels." Emily joined him at the window, straining to see what had triggered his concern. The surrounding area appeared deserted, scattered boulders, stunted mesquite trees, the remnants of mining equipment partially reclaimed by the desert. Then she spotted it, a brief glint of light reflecting off metal from behind a boulder approximately 50 yards from the cabin. The position offered a clear view of both the cabin door and the path leading from town. "Someone's watching," she whispered. "Waiting for Jenkins." Daniel nodded grimly. "Or for us to emerge. Either way, we're compromised." He moved to the trapdoor, concealing the tunnel entrance. "We need to leave, now, before they surround the cabin completely." "But Jenkins," Emily began. "Jenkins knows to approach cautiously," Daniel assured her. "He's survived this territory longer than either of us. He'll recognize the signs of an ambush." As Daniel lifted the trapdoor, a sound outside froze them both. Multiple horses approaching at a trot, making no attempt at concealment this time. Thorne's patience had evidently run out. "Go," Daniel urged, gesturing toward the dark tunnel. "I'll follow." Emily hesitated, torn between immediate obedience and concern for his injured state. "Your wound will be irrelevant if Thorne's men find us," he interrupted firmly. "Go, now." The tunnel's darkness swallowed them completely once Daniel pulled the trapdoor shut behind them. Emily fumbled with matches, finally lighting the lantern she'd carried from Jenkins' cellar the previous night. Its weak glow barely penetrated the oppressive blackness, revealing rough-hewn walls supported by timber beams that groaned under the weight of earth above. "Move quickly but carefully," Daniel whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Sound carries in these passages." Above them, muffled thumps and splintering wood signaled Thorne's men breaking into the abandoned cabin. Emily fought the urge to run, maintaining the measured pace Daniel had set, despite the panic clawing at her throat. The passage narrowed as they progressed, forcing them to crouch beneath sagging support beams. In places, the tunnel floor had buckled upward from shifting earth, creating obstacles they navigated with painstaking care. Any noise, a dislodged stone, a scrape of boot against rock, might carry to pursuers who would surely discover the tunnel entrance. Daniel moved with remarkable fortitude despite his wound, though Emily noted his increasingly labored breathing. When they reached a junction, where the main tunnel split into 3 branches, he paused, studying the options with critical assessment. "Left passage returns to settlement," he murmured. "Right likely leads to another mining claim. Straight ahead. Follows the original copper vein, deeper into the hillside." "Which way?" Emily asked, straining to hear any sounds of pursuit behind them. Daniel pointed straight ahead. "Main vein, longest route, but most likely to have additional exits where miners dug air shafts." They proceeded into the central passage, which gradually declined deeper underground. The air grew noticeably cooler and damper, with mineral-laden droplets seeping through the ceiling to splash against the earthen floor. Twice they encountered cave-ins that required careful navigation around fallen debris. After what seemed an eternity, but might have been only 30 minutes, a distant shout echoed through the tunnel. Thorne's men had discovered the trapdoor and entered the passage. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as Daniel extinguished their lantern. "Keep one hand on the wall," he instructed, his voice barely audible. "Move as silently as possible." They continued in absolute darkness, the sounds of pursuit growing, neither louder nor fainter, their hunters maintaining pace but not gaining ground. Emily focused on each step, each breath, pushing away the suffocating fear that threatened to overwhelm her rational mind. Her outstretched hand suddenly met empty air rather than the tunnel wall. She froze, momentarily disoriented until Daniel guided her forward into what felt like a larger chamber. "Mining chamber," he whispered. "Feel upward. Might be an air shaft." Emily stretched her arms overhead, fingers exploring the darkness until they detected a subtle air current from above. "Here," she breathed. "Air moving." Daniel struck a match, its brief flare revealing they stood in an excavated chamber, perhaps 15 feet across. Above them, a narrow vertical shaft rose toward the surface, crude handholds carved into its sides at irregular intervals. "Escape route," Daniel confirmed, already moving toward it. "You first. I'll follow." Emily hesitated, eyeing his injured side. "Your wound is less important than your safety," he interrupted firmly. "Climb now." Recognizing the futility of argument, Emily grasped the first handhold and began her ascent. The shaft was barely wide enough for her slender frame. Daniel, with his broader shoulders, would find it significantly more challenging. The handholds, carved decades earlier by miners of varying skill, proved treacherously uneven, some offering secure purchase, others crumbling beneath her weight. 20 feet up, with her arms burning from exertion, Emily's head struck something. A solid, careful exploration with one hand revealed a wooden cover blocking the shaft. She pushed experimentally, meeting firm resistance. "Sealed," she called down softly. "Must be secured from above," Daniel replied from below. "Brace yourself and push hard." Emily wedged her body against the shaft walls, positioning her shoulders beneath the wooden barrier. With every ounce of strength she could muster, she drove. Upward. The cover shifted slightly, sending a shower of dirt onto her upturned face. She pushed again, harder, feeling splinters dig into her palms as the weathered wood finally gave way. Sunlight, blindingly bright after the tunnel's darkness, poured through the opening. Emily scrambled through, emerging amid scrub brush on a hillside perhaps half a mile from the abandoned cabin. She turned immediately to help Daniel, who was making slower progress up the shaft, his movements hampered by his injury. When he finally emerged, his face was ashen beneath its natural copper tone, fresh blood staining his bandaged side. Emily supported him as they moved away from the shaft opening, seeking cover behind a large boulder that offered concealment from both the cabin and the settlement. "We need to keep moving," Daniel insisted between labored breaths. "Thorne's men will eventually find this exit." "You need rest," Emily countered, concern overriding deference to his judgment for the first time in their partnership. "Just a few minutes to catch your breath." Daniel's acquiescence spoke volumes about his condition. He slumped against the boulder, eyes closed momentarily as he gathered his depleted strength. "Jenkins was supposed to meet us at dusk," he noted, squinting at the sun's position. "Still several hours away." Emily surveyed their surroundings, identifying potential escape routes and hiding places with the tactical awareness Daniel had cultivated. In her, "There's a dry wash leading away from the settlement," she observed. "Provides cover all the way to those hills to the west." "Good assessment," Daniel approved. "Hills connect to the Dragoon Mountains eventually. Apache territory. Safer for us than anywhere under territorial authority now." The realization struck Emily with unexpected force. They were now fugitives, not just from Blackwell's gang, but from the law itself. Her testimony against Thorne and his associates threatened the entire power structure of the Arizona Territory. There would be no justice through official channels, no triumphant day in court exposing the conspiracy behind her family's murder. "What happens now?" she asked, the question encompassing far more than their immediate tactical situation. Daniel studied her face, recognizing the deeper meaning behind her words. "Now we find a different kind of justice," he answered. "Apache justice. Not courts and jails, but balance restored to what was broken." Blackwell and Thorne might never face a judge, Emily observed, the reality settling into her consciousness like a physical weight. "No," Daniel agreed, "but they will face consequences. Different. Path, same destination." He shifted position, wincing slightly. "First, we survive. Reach Apache stronghold in Dragoons, where Thorne's influence doesn't extend. From there, we build alliance with others harmed by these men. Apache bands, Mexican villages, honest settlers. Create evidence too substantial for even corrupt officials to ignore." Even in his weakened state, Daniel's strategic mind continued functioning with remarkable clarity. Emily recognized the practical wisdom in his approach, a campaign that would take time, but stood greater chance of ultimate success than any direct confrontation. "My family would want me to survive," she said softly, the statement confirming her decision more to herself than to Daniel. To live for justice rather than die for revenge. The distant sound of voices from the direction of the mineshaft entrance spurred them into motion. Daniel rose with visible effort, Emily supporting him as they moved toward the dry wash she had identified. Their progress was painfully slow, each step requiring deliberate placement to avoid dislodging stones that might reveal their position. When they reached the wash, its 8-foot banks providing welcome concealment, Emily found herself unconsciously taking the lead, scouting ahead, selecting their path, applying the very skills Daniel had taught her during their weeks together, the student becoming a partner in full. "You've changed," Daniel observed during a brief rest, watching her scan the terrain ahead with practiced efficiency. "Not just surviving now, thriving." "I had a good teacher," Emily replied, offering him water from her canteen, "and strong motivation." Daniel accepted the water, his dark eyes holding hers with unexpected intensity. Heard an Apache saying once, "After great loss comes great strength." Seen it happen. Person emerges from tragedy either broken forever or forged into something new, something powerful. Emily considered this as she helped him to his feet. The girl who had gathered eggs on that fateful morning at the Mitchell homestead seemed to belong to another lifetime, naive, sheltered, unprepared for the world's harsher realities. The person she had become in these harsh weeks might never again fit comfortably in proper society, might carry scars both visible and hidden for the remainder of her days, but had gained something precious amid the unthinkable loss, the capacity to face adversity with courage and resourcefulness. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they caught sight of a solitary rider approaching from the direction of Copper Springs. Jenkins, keeping his promise despite the danger. The trader dismounted when he spotted them, leading his horse into the wash with obvious relief. "Thorns turned the settlement upside down looking for you two," he reported, handing them a bag of supplies. "Got my apprentice creating a diversion on the east side of town to pull his men away from this route." Daniel quickly outlined their plan to reach Apache territory and the dragoons. Jenkins nodded his understanding, then produced a folded document from inside his vest. "Might help," he said, handing it to Emily. "Telegraph came yesterday before Thorne arrived. Didn't mention it earlier because I needed to verify its authenticity." Emily unfolded the paper, finding an official communication from the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., requesting information about surviving witnesses to criminal activities of Frederick Harland, alias Blackwell and Associates, and specifically naming Miss Emily Mitchell, daughter of homesteader Samuel Mitchell. "Federal investigation," Jenkins explained, "separate from territorial authorities. Apparently someone higher up noticed the pattern of violence and corruption. The document represented something Emily had nearly abandoned hope of finding. Legitimate authorities interested in the truth, beyond the reach of Thorne's territorial influence. It wasn't a guarantee of justice, but it rekindled the possibility that her family's murderers might eventually face formal accountability for their crimes." As Emily carefully secured the telegram in her pocket, Daniel and Jenkins conferred about the safest route to the Dragoon stronghold. The path ahead remained dangerous, the outcome uncertain, but for the first time since watching her home burn, Emily felt something beyond simple determination driving her forward. It was hope, tempered by harsh experience, realistic rather than naive, but hope nonetheless. Hope that survived like a desert flower after devastating fire, drawing strength from the very adversity that should have destroyed it. Mitchell's, "Don't surrender." Her father's words echoed in her mind as she gazed toward the distant mountains that promised temporary sanctuary. She had honored that family motto through weeks of desperate survival. Now she would honor it by living deliberately, purposefully, in pursuit of the justice her family deserved, not just the lone survivor of tragedy, but its witness and eventual reckoning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.